border war. Fans called it Moonshine Throwdown. I think that's the best rivalry name, an unofficial name, but the best rivalry name I've come across.
Yeah, unofficial that should become official soon enough.
Embrace it.
Throws deep downfield for the end zone, a lunging catch, and it's a score for the Herd, Jerron Woodyard. And it is 37-0, and Grant Wells is moving up toward a 300-yard passing performance in the first half. That is his 4th touchdown toss.
Story toward Jackson, got separation to the 20, to the 10, and he will go. Lucky Jackson from 54 yards out.
Pressure off the edge. Screen delivers. What a catch, Levias, who brings it in. Armani Levias to the house. Touchdown, Marshall.
This will be from 52 yards. From the far hash mark. John Haggerty, the punter, will hold. Jared Nash will snap it. It's definitely long enough. It is good! Unbelievable. The true freshman, Corey Munson, hammers it home from 52 yards.
Welcome back to the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Trace is here with me, and we get to relive and wrap up Marshall's incredible Game 1 victory over Eastern Kentucky to the tune of 59-0. And before we go any further, if you thought this game was going to be 59-0, you were fooling yourself. Nobody saw that. With all the question marks and everything surrounding this Herd team and the season as a whole, to predict 59-0, no way. Everybody was probably thinking, like Trace and I were thinking, mid-30s to somewhere in the teens would be where this game would probably end up. But, man, Marshall dazzled from the opening whistle to the final whistle, and it was an amazing display to watch. Trace, before we even get into stats, let's take a few minutes and talk about what this means potentially for the Marshall brand. And I'm going to preface this with a couple of talking points that I want to get your thoughts on. Number one, you're coming off of a big win on ESPN in the first game after the college game day type program in a pandemic era right now where everybody in the country is starved for football. And we talked about how big this could potentially be if Marshall was able to come out and just annihilate the opponent or put on a real show. And, man, they did more than what we thought was going to happen. So let's talk about what this potentially means for that. And then I want to talk about what this potentially means for Marshall as far as in-state recruiting goes, because of how many in-state kids made plays, were on the field, and shined on this big stage. So let's talk first about what it means for the brand and being on ESPN in the first game.
Oh, yeah, it could be big things for the brand. I mean, we talked about it on the last episode, the preview. We talked about, and you talked about, if Marshall could go out there and put up 100 points, they need to go out there and put up 100 points. And one of my keys to victory was they needed a fast start. They needed to show the country that they could go out and put up 14 or 21 points in the blink of an eye. They put up 14 or 21 in the blink of an eye. I mean, it was every single drive in the first half. Most every drive in the first half was flawless. I mean, absolutely flawless. I can only think of about maybe 2 plays that actually went backwards. I mean, like Willie Johnson went backwards on that reverse, and then Grant Wells got sacked once. And I swear I think that's the only 2 plays that were negative in the whole game. At least when the starters were in there, that's the only 2 that were negative, I think. So, like, that was shocking to see how well, and it wasn't just the offense. I mean, the whole team was just as sharp as you could possibly be. I mean, it's actually kind of mind-blowing because, like, I mean, I expected a comfortable win, and I think everybody expected a comfortable win, but nobody expected 59-0, let alone 59 points, all because of the offense. You know, even with my 34 points, I thought one of those would be special teams or defensive. So
yeah, as did I. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it was literally 59 points, all based on the offense, and then the field goal, which the offense set up. So I mean, it was absolutely just mind blowing to see how good they were. And I'm gonna be very interested to see the viewership for this game, because there's a website that I'm on, and I think it's called Sports Watch Media, I think, and like they always put ratings and viewership for the college games and different sports games and events. They have not put these on here yet, but I'm gonna be very interested to see what it ends up being, because like I would think it would have to be the highest of the day, just because, or at least one of the highest, because I mean it was the first game on ESPN on the first quote unquote big college football Saturday of 2020. It would have to be a good rating. So like that could be huge for Marshall in recruiting and seeing two West Virginia quarterbacks out there playing really well. And we'll save a little bit more for that later. But no, I mean it was really the perfect scenario for an opening game, especially given the weird circumstances surrounding the game and everything. So kudos to everybody involved in this game. Yeah.
I mean, not only did Marshall look good playing football, they just looked good. And let's talk about those stellar new uniform designs that came through in glorious. They look glorious on television. So big shout out to Herd Equipment and the job they did. Those guys looked really good. And then to go out and put on the display that they did, it just really made for a pleasurable viewing experience. Not only if you're a Herd fan, but just to the casual college football fan, that was probably a very attractive game to watch. It was very appealing to the eyes. So great job for those new uniforms. They just came out looking so good.
Oh,
and you mentioned –
I was going to say real quick, they make last year's look bad. Like, that's how good they are.
Yeah. I mean, you would think the subtle changes that they made really wouldn't make that big of a difference, but man, they do. They really do. And you talked about the West Virginia kids on the roster. Let's talk about for a minute. Marshall always tries to extend offers and recruit in state, especially to, the who's who of West Virginia high school football seniors, and to actually have some of the bigger names in the state on the roster, not only on the roster, but playing in the game and putting up stats and scoring has to be something that Doc Holliday and staff is finally glad they were able to accomplish. You talk about just a handful of kids right off the top of my head. Grant Wells, Luke Zaban, both quarterbacks, both West Virginia kids. Amir Richardson, tight end, gets from Morgantown, gets a touchdown late in the game. Owen Porter gets in defensively, makes a few big plays. I think even gets a half a sack or something like that. And then, of course, Derek Pitts from South Charleston is out there running all over in the secondary. It's got to be good. It's got to raise some eyebrows, or maybe even turn on a few prospects that maybe weren't that heavy on Marshall now. It's got to perk them up a little bit to what they can actually do and the opportunity they might have in Huntington if they see Marshall as a real contender, instead of just going, you know what, I'm going to Morgantown, I'll walk on, and if I get to play, I get to play. Doc and staff have really put an emphasis on these kids. They're showing if they can play, then they'll get in there. So what do you think as far as West Virginia in-state recruiting? Do you think Marshall made some real inroads, even just after one game in the in-state recruiting game?
I think they would have had to have, honestly. I mean, it's kind of the same philosophy with basketball. I mean, look at how well Dan D'Antoni has been able to recruit West Virginia and turn it into significant contributors for the basketball program. And, I mean, and then that NCAA tournament run and everything would have had to have helped that. And now in this situation with a lot of eyeballs on him, seeing Grant Wells go out there and play as good as he could possibly play, as far as I'm concerned, seeing Luke Zaban do what he did, seeing a couple other guys out there, that's got to be appealing for West Virginians. I mean, West Virginia high school sports athletes and everything. But I mean, hopefully they push that effort a little bit more. I know some fans have been critical of Doc for not getting as many West Virginia kids as he could have. I mean, it's harder to do because, but I will say, though, over the last 2 or 3 years and moving forward, West Virginia is really, the high school football scene is really raising as far as the athletes. So there should be no excuses to not be able to have more players of that caliber. And, I mean, the announcers and everybody, Twitter, everybody was just raving about Wells. I mean, and that's cool to see because he's literally from Charleston. I mean, he played at GW. He plays Hurricane every year, basically. So, it was cool to see that in that big of a limelight. So that's got to be good moving forward if they can keep getting the West Virginia kids. And now they can be like, well, we can go here and we can play and really show out and really make a big impact. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, I mean, you got to like it. I mentioned something about it during the game. I tweeted it, and it got a little bit of traction. And I know that guys that, like I said, that may not have really considered Marshall had to have been like, well, you know what? Let me rethink that, because these kids look good. They did. They look good. So let's talk about some overall game stats. Marshall just dominated the offensive side of the ball. 627 yards of offense versus 166 for Eastern Kentucky. And they really didn't, I mean, they were plus 9 minutes basically in the time of possession game, but it wasn't like, 45 minutes to 15 minutes. They were pretty efficient. 34 minutes, 23 seconds for the Herd, 25 minutes, 37 seconds for Eastern Kentucky. First downs is basically laughable. This is video game numbers. 34 first downs to 7.
Yeah.
And you might think, wow, man, Eastern Kentucky must have turned the ball over a ton in order for the Herd to have this much yardage. No, turnovers 1-0. So Eastern Kentucky turned it over one time. Marshall kept the ball clean all game long, didn't turn over once. Another note, Marshall did not punt in this game. And I know we got a tongue-in-cheek question here at the last minute when I thought about tweeting about questions. Somebody said, do you think this will affect Robert Lefevre or something like that because of the lack of reps? And I know that was a tongue-in-cheek question because of how much you praise Robert Lefevre and how much he has developed in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And specifically against Eastern Kentucky, where you kind of laid it to him a little bit over that effort. But let me just answer that real quick. I don't even need your take. No, it will not affect him. This is the kind of effect that you want to have if your punter never sees the field. Great. Wow. But yeah, 166 total yards allowed. How stingy was that defense? I mean, 59 points on 627 yards, 34 first downs. How efficient was this offense? Trace, before we get into individual stats, let's just talk about that. We see now if Marshall has the ability to run a tempo type offense and can get in a rhythm, they can potentially be dangerous. Now, look, this is a one-game sample versus basically a pretty bad team, but it's still live game speed football. And Marshall proved that they can execute. They've got receivers that have speed and can go get the ball. I've seen for the first time in really a long time, not just in the past couple of years, but really since Rakeem Cato's left, consistency in the quarterbacks stepping into throws. We see a real difference when you get that ball on a frozen rope or kids throwing the long ball and letting the receiver go get it. So let's talk about what the Marshall offense looked like. Like I said, we'll pump the brakes a little bit because it was against basically a bad team, but still, it's no substitute for live game speed football.
Absolutely. I mean, and Eastern Kentucky might have a bad year, but I mean, just if you could just base off of last year, they weren't a bad FCS team. Like they won 7 games last year, but even at that, they're not on Marshall's level, clearly. So, I mean, yeah, you have to take it into consideration, especially with Wells' performance and the offensive performance. But, like, I've seen plenty of games over the last few years against really bad teams where Marshall's offense put up 23 points, 32 points, 30 points. That's not very impressive. So, like, they were the sharpest that they've been offensively probably in multiple years, no, without a doubt about it. I mean, there was just nothing that you could remotely criticize the offense for. They didn't turn a ball over. They only had 2 penalties the whole game. They scored every time they were in the red zone. Most of them were almost all of them were touchdowns, excluding 1 field goal. They were extremely efficient on third downs, fourth downs, which I'll get into more with grades and stuff. But I mean, this offense, this was as good as it's looked in a long time. And I was texting with some of my friends at the game, and one of my buddies said that it's almost like they trust Wells more than they trust Green. It just seems like, I mean, even as a freshman, it seems like they maybe trust him a little bit more to run that type of offense. And I mean, when he can flat out spin that football, like he's got. I'll get more into him too with grades, but just yes, it is Eastern Kentucky. Yes, it is not who they're going to be playing in a couple weeks. They're going to be playing App State, and that's a whole different beast. But I mean, for a first impression, you could not have asked for more. I mean. And whether you're playing a bad team or not, he's still making those throws. He's still I think he had like 7 incompletions, and most of those were on target. Like I only think of 1 or 2 passes that were actually legitimately off target. So like, you can't ask for more than that. I mean, and I think that has to resonate with. I mean, maybe the rest of Conference USA. Obviously, now they're like, okay, well, maybe Marshall's found out the quarterback situation now. So,
well, I'm sure that happened. It had to have happened. They were thinking, wow, Marshall's got a huge question mark, and then everybody and their brother is falling in love with Grant Wells during the game, like real time.
yeah.
And it had to put notice on every team that's on Marshall's schedule, App State included, thinking, okay, maybe they are going to be a little bit better than we thought they were going to be. So
Awesome.
it was, and we also got to take a second. We've got to shout out to that offensive line because, man, they opened holes for 282 team rushing yards,
just dominant,
and 345 team passing yards. Yes, the quarterbacks got sacked a couple of times, but hey, it is what it is. Marshall dropped back and threw the ball, like 30-some, 40-some times? I don't know exactly how many it was, but let's see. Marshall had 29 total dropbacks, 54 running plays. I mean, that's kind of stuff you like to see. But shout out to the offensive line. They were, as advertised, played really, really well. So let's talk about some stats, Trace. I know this is where it gets fun for you as a numbers. I don't want to call you a numbers nerd, but I know you like stats.
I
know you know that's an endearing term when it comes from me, but it's numbers time. So, folks, look, I know we're like 13 minutes into this episode, and we haven't really even talked stats yet, but look, let's face it, Marshall may not play another game like this season, and to have the number of guys put up numbers that they did, I mean, the sheer volume of players that show up in the stat book is amazing. The way they, spread the ball around, passing and receiving and running, it's amazing. So we have a lot to talk about, and we're given that Marshall has a bye next week, and that the Western Kentucky Louisville preview episode will be its own episode. We're just going to take the moment and talk in depth about this because this is amazing. We're going to start, of course, with quarterbacking, and that's Grant Wells started the game. He went 16 for 23, 307 yards, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 89.4 QBR, ran the ball 6 times for plus 30 yards. All that accounted for was an all-time Marshall record in yardage and tied for the all-time Marshall record in touchdowns for a quarterback making his debut. Pretty solid effort. Luke Zaban, no slouch, 6 of 6 for 38 yards, 1 touchdown, no interceptions, 92.6 QBR, 2 carries for 17 yards. We're going to stop right there, and we're going to talk about quarterbacks for a minute. Leading in, easily the largest question mark after Isaiah Green entered the transfer portal. And I'm not going to say that those questions have been entirely put to rest. And in fact, I think this is a little bit of a dangerous game with Herd fans because now so many of them have fallen in love with Grant Wells, and they're thinking, all right, well, I expect 300 yards and 4 touchdowns every single game. We know that's not going to happen. And we're going to find out the real test here in 2 weeks when Appalachian State comes to Huntington, and he's going to play a much stouter defense. But you got to like what you see right off the bat. So talk about the 2 quarterbacks a little bit more in depth, things you like to see, and basically just what you think it means for Marshall moving forward.
Well, it could mean really, really good things because, I mean, it's well documented by everybody how the quarterback situation has not been where it's needed to be, where it has been needed to be over the last few years since Rakeem Cato graduated. Everybody knows this. There's been flashes. Chase Litton had a great freshman year. Isaiah Green had a co-freshman of the year in 2018. You had some moments there, but it just wasn't there consistently enough to get Marshall over the championship hump. And, I mean, if you just go on this game from yesterday, Grant Wells could get them into the championship conversation this year. I mean, it's a long way to go, but he was spectacular. I mean, he was literally as good. As far as I'm concerned, he was as good as he could be because those incompletions weren't even really bad throws. Like, there was 1 or 2 drops. There was a couple passes that were right on the money. They just were just a little bit off. I mean, his accuracy was uncanny. I mean, that's what it was. I mean, he completed almost 70% of his passes and threw for over 300 yards. And the QBR of 89.4, I mean, I don't think, if I would look back at the numbers, I don't think Isaiah Green ever had a QBR that high in 2 seasons as a starter. So, like, I mean, it almost, I mean, it could end up being kind of a detriment just because you mentioned it. Now fans are going to go in expecting way too much every game. But, like, this kid seems like he's the real deal. All the announcers on ESPN, Andre Ware, he was He said he is a complete package at quarterback, and so far I would believe that because he can throw it. He can throw it with the best of them. He can put it in tight windows. He's really good out of the pocket with his feet. He can run the ball. He runs a 4.5 40. I mean, what more do you want in a quarterback? He's just got it, I think. And if he can keep it going, then Marshall can absolutely play for a championship this year if the season plays out or what have you. But I mean, you have to be extremely impressed with Grant Wells. And the same thing for Luke Zaban. I mean, coming in there in reserve time, he played really well. I mean, and they both ran the ball effectively when they got the chance. So, I mean, you have to be impressed. And I'll save a couple more tidbits for that in the grades. But, I mean, yeah, you have to be. This is the first time in quite a while that Marshall fans should be in unison very excited about the quarterback play.
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely surprising. One, I don't think anyone thought that two Marshall quarterbacks would combine for a total of 22 out of 29 and 340 some yards and 5 touchdowns with no picks. Nobody thought that was going to happen. So that's nice to see. But the last thing I'm going to say about these quarterbacks, and it's actually not even about Wells or Zaban. It's one final note about Isaiah Green. And he was tweeting during the game, and to his credit, man, he was talking about how he was sad that he wasn't out there, suited up and all that kind of stuff. But man, he had nothing but positive things to say all game long about how well Grant Wells was playing and how well these Marshall quarterbacks looked on television. So I know that's a tough situation to be in, but it's really first class to see the kid hey man, I can't be there, but it's really good to see you guys doing well. So major respect to Isaiah Green, in what has to be a personal tough situation to just kind of rise above it a little bit and be first class. That's pretty awesome.
Respect.
Let's talk about these runners. Brendan Knox actually not the leading rusher this week. It's Knowledge McDaniel, 14 carries for 93 yards. Brendan Knox had 18 carries on 85 yards, 1 touchdown. Sheldon Evans, 8 carries, 32 yards, 1 touchdown. The Herd actually had 7 rushers over 4 yards per carry. I didn't write everybody down, but there were, we mentioned the quarterbacks. Both of those guys had over 4 yards a carry, and then several running backs. Papillon, couple carries. He even found the end zone once. I mean, they went deep at running back. We knew Marshall was deep, and they went deep. 1, 2, 3, 4 deep at running back. 2 quarterbacks ran the ball, and of course Xavier Gaines had a carry. And you mentioned Willie Johnson was basically the only negative play. After we pumped him up the whole time, about every time he touches the ball, that goes for a big play. It goes for a 6-yard loss. But
just poor blocking.
Let's talk about these running backs, how they are basically as advertised. I mean, Knowledge McDaniel looks like it may be the solid RB3. We thought it might come down between him and Papillon, at least for game 1. It's Knowledge McDaniel, and he turns into being the leading rusher. So thoughts on the running game?
I'll tell you this, outside of Grant Wells, that was what stood out to me the most in this game is their running backs. I'm telling you right now, that unit is going to be really good this year. I mean, you have 4 running backs that potentially could start for anybody in Conference USA. You have 4 of those calibers. I'm dead serious when I say that. I mean, that's a good unit. That's a really good unit. I mean, when you have 282 yards rushing or whatever it was, and the leading rusher has 93 yards. I mean, that's some depth. That is some balance. I mean, let's just look at the top. Just start from the top and go down. I mean, Brendan Knox, we know what he is. He is what he is. He's a superstar. He's going to be that. Sheldon Evans, it could start for pretty much anybody in Conference USA. They have nothing but nice things to say about him as a leader. He was a captain this week. Just an absolute, just great player in his own right. And then you have Knowledge McDaniel coming out there, and they said on the broadcast that the coaches compare him to Brendan Knox. So he could be like Knox 2.0, and he was running really hard, downhill. I mean, just awesome stuff. And then Lawrence Papillon got in there more, and he showed nice flashes. So, I mean, you have to be extremely excited about the running backs this year, because if there's an injury here or there, they have guys they can turn to. And plus, with that offensive line that was getting such a push the whole game, I mean, that's what I said. We all think that could be a straight up dominant force this year, the O-line. and it was against Eastern Kentucky, and I think it will continue to be. So honestly, outside of Grant Wells, that's going to take the headline from this game because of obvious reasons. But other than that, I was most impressed with the running backs, to be perfectly honest with you.
Well, I'm on record as saying I thought Brendan Knox would go for 200 yards, maybe 2-3 quarters, because I just thought that's what the offense was going to look like. I thought they were just going to try to run all over Eastern Kentucky and call it a day. And it's like everything they called worked. So they were like, all right, well, let's try this. Let's call that. Now, all the pass plays seemed to work. All the running plays worked. Everybody was hitting the blocks the right way and opening the holes, and it just worked. So they were like, well, let's see what we can do here. And when it was all said and done, it was 59-0. Yep. And a myriad of runners had multiple carries. A myriad of receivers had multiple catches. I mean, it was pretty something to behold. So let's talk about that receiving game. Talik Keaton, leading receiver yardage-wise, 2 catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. Brock Thompson, leading receiver receptions-wise, 5 receptions, 67 yards. Xavier Gaines, 3 catches, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Garrett Morrell, 2 catches, 47 yards, and a touchdown. And Jaron Woodyard, you mentioned the transfer from Nebraska. We wondered how he would translate to the Herd offense, since Marshall had success with guys like Tyree Brady, who really didn't have very much in the stat book at their previous stop. Only 1 catch, but boy, it was a doozy. 42-yard, beautiful touchdown pass. Yeah. And Amir Richardson, 1 catch, 3 yards, and a touchdown. All in all, 13 different Marshall players caught a pass. 13. Five tight ends caught a pass. Ends caught a pass on 22 total receptions. 3 tight ends caught touchdown passes. Wow. It looks like Marshall is going to continue to utilize their tight ends unlike anybody else in the country, just maybe in a different way unlike anybody in the country. 5 tight ends catch a pass in a game. 3 of them go for touchdown. 3 different tight ends catch a touchdown pass. So, okay. Huge question mark coming in was the wide receivers and who would take the step, who would make the leap. Would we see more consistency? And I think without a doubt, the answer to the consistency question is yes, there is more consistency in the receiving game. I don't think anything may factor into that more than they're getting catchable balls. Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to, put anybody down, but there's just a difference. There's a difference in the balls that we're seeing in this game versus what we saw in games past. So they're proving like you give them a chance to make a play. By and large, they're going to make a play, but it remains to be seen if there will be some bad drops throughout the season. I'm sure there will be. There always is. But thoughts on the Herd's ability to spread around the ball in the receiving game? Barstool Marshall put up a tweet at the end of the game with a bunch of different guys and a bunch of different stats, and it was just it was mind-boggling. And I had tweeted to that, like, who the hell do you game plan against? Who? Yeah. Yeah. You got all these runners racking yards. You got all these receivers racking yards. 2 quarterbacks playing effectively. Who do you game plan against? But let's talk about the wide receivers and tight ends right now.
I think you got to be pumped. I think you got to be pumped straight up about it. I mean, they have to do it game in and game out. We know how that is. They have to do it game in and game out. But all last season, we never saw anything close to this, no matter who it was against. No matter if it was against VMI, who was horrible, whether it was against FAU or conference champions or whoever, whatever level you want to look at. We never saw anything like that yet last year. And Brock Thompson looks like a different receiver this year. Number-wise, obviously he is, but he just looks like a different player. Maybe taking that burden of 88 off his shoulders helps him. Who knows? We've been vocal about that. But, I mean, the fact that they had 13 different players catch a pass, like, that's got to be some type of I don't know if it's a record, but it's got to be one of the highest ever for Marshall. I mean, that's unbelievable. I mean, and the announcers, when I watched the game back on DVR, like they were just going off about how many quote unquote like shiny toys that Grant Wells had to throw to. And like, I mean, they all made plays. I mean, the tight end depth looks better than I thought it would be. I mean, we knew Xavier Gaines, he was a known entity. We thought Devin Miller was good, and he's proved to be yesterday. But looking at Garrett Morrell could be like a very dark horse part of the offense this year. I mean,
can we stop for a second and remind fans that he was the starting quarterback for 2 games in 2016?
The starting quarterback.
He started against Louisville, and he started against Western Kentucky to end the season. Yeah. And now he's catching touchdowns as a tight end.
It's crazy. So, and all the receivers. I mean, Woodyard, he made that great catch. He showed flashes. Brock Thompson, of course. Gamage got in there some. I mean, just so many weapons they could. Talik Keaton. I mean, guys they could turn to. So hopefully they're more consistent this year. Hopefully they can do this game. I mean, I'm not going to expect 13 players catching passes every game, but hopefully they're more consistent as a receiving core this year, and I think they will be. I mean, having Grant Wells at quarterback, if he keeps panning out like this, that's going to help him immensely too. So you got to be really excited about the receiving group this year based on one game.
Yeah, I mean, 22 receptions, 13 different guys catch a pass. Oddly missing from the stat line, though, is Artie Henry. So you have another weapon that just didn't happen to get a catch in this game. So yeah. I think Marshall's got the ability right now, as it looks on a 1-game sample, I got to keep saying that, to take a bump or two and lose some guys and still be okay. The one thing that I saw for sure is that Marshall has speed at wide receiver and lot of it. Jaron Woodyard is a flat bullet. Talik Keaton is a flat bullet. Artie Henry is a bullet. Willie Johnson is a bullet. I mean, we know these guys. Some of them we knew already were just speedsters, and now we know for sure that some more are. This is going to be a matchup nightmare for a lot of secondaries up and down Marshall's schedule. So I'm sure a lot of defensive coaches' eyes and ears perked up when they saw the play of a lot of these guys. All right, let's talk about defense. Defense really didn't have to be on the field for a super ton of plays, so there's not any particular stat lines that are going to blow you away. But Tavante Beckett, of course, is Mr. Consistency. He's taken over that role from Chase Hancock from a couple of years ago. Leading tackler, 8 tackles, 1 solo, half a sack, and 1.5 tackles for loss. How about sophomore linebacker Eli Neal? Also 8 tackles, 1 solo, and a half a tackle for loss. Najee Johnson, 6 tackles, 2 solo, and an interception. All in all, Herd defenders, 6 of them with at least 5 tackles, 3 recorded at least a half a sack, and 5 recorded at least a half a tackle for loss. So we were sharing the wealth on defense as well. To know that it doesn't have to all fall on the shoulders of Tavante Beckett is A, refreshing. B, I didn't mention Darius Hodge at all in that list of guys that I talked about, and he still had a solid game, as did Kobe Cumberlander, 2 guys that we put a lot of emphasis on. And C, it's good to know that there are so many playmakers, especially when not too long ago we learned that Jaquan Yulee had put his name in the transfer portal, and that was what we hoped was going to be a big part of the Marshall defense if he was able to get released to play ball. Man, this defense, it's kind of more of the same. We had some questions, and boy, it looks like they just reloaded again. It's curbed the enthusiasm a little bit. This offense of Eastern Kentucky is not as potent as some that they're going to face this year, but man, they looked good. What are your thoughts, Trace?
I agree. I mean, they definitely look good. I think you got to be excited. But, I mean, it's like you said, it's Eastern Kentucky. It's Eastern Kentucky. We're going to keep saying it over and over. That's who it was. But, I mean, they still held them to 0 points. I mean, it's hard to hold teams to 0 points. And they really only had 2 drives that they even threatened to score on. And, they ended up not getting any points. So, and the defense was really good on 3rd down. They stopped them on 4th down. I remember they had, a 4th down on, less than a yard. They blew that up. I mean, impressive stuff. I mean, and then Tavante Beckett, I mean, not necessarily a massive stat line, but I just feel like he was all over the field. I mean, even on certain plays where he didn't make the tackle, he was the first guy to make contact. He was the one blowing it up. I mean, just what more can you ask for out of Tavante Beckett than what he's been given Marshall? He's an absolute stud. Probably going to hopefully get drafted at some point. I mean, they talked about how he's a little bit undersized for a linebacker, but he makes up for it with speed because he's extremely quick. So, I mean, you got to love that. Defensive line, you got to like what you saw there. I mean, they shut down the run. Darius Hodge of the Eastern Kentucky's very first play of the game had about an 8 or 9 yard loss, a sack, blew that up. You got to like what you saw of the secondary, even though they really did not get tested very much. They rarely ever threw it downfield in this game, but Nazeeh Johnson got an interception, which you like that. I mean, I've said that I think Nazeeh Johnson could be a first-team all-conference player this year, could have like a Malik Gant type of season. He very well could. So, I mean, they have options on defense. I mean, I'm more sold now. This isn't to undersell the defense. I'm more sold on what the offense did than what the defense did, just because I feel like the defense really didn't get tested that much. But like a couple of weeks, they're going to be tested. But I mean, I think you got to be happy with it. You can only play who you're going against. You can't pick and choose who you play like that. I mean, especially in these weird circumstances. So, defense played. I mean, what more can you? They give up 0 points and 160 something total yards. I mean, you gotta love that, no matter who it's against.
Well, yeah. And how many times did we see the Herd not come down with interceptions when they had the ability to do so last year? So even if you're going to take small little victories at this point, take them. You got the interception that could have easily bounced off and not been an interception. I mean, it's an upgrade over some of the things we saw last year. And 0 points speaks for itself. I don't care who you're playing. You put up a goose egg. That's a big deal. And let's talk about a couple of those guys from Eastern Kentucky that we put a spotlight on. How about a preseason All-OVC running back Alonzo Booth, that 6'1", 250-pounder? I mean, the Herd defense held him to 33 yards on 15 carries. And you mentioned that one play where it was like 4th and a half a yard or 4th and a foot. That was him that got that carry, 250 pounds, and Tavante Beckett busted through the line and brought him down for like a 2-yard loss. And basically all the guy needed to do was fall forward. So, I mean, those are the kind of plays you like to see. I mean, the leading receiver for Eastern Kentucky was the guy we put the spotlight around, that Keon Dixon, 6'3", 185-pounder. I mean, 3 catches for 34 yards. Marshall did well. I mean, they limited Eastern Kentucky to 10 total receptions. I mean, 80 total yards. What more can you ask for? Of course, this is, if anything, this is a confidence-building game. This is a chemistry-building game to know that these guys are doing something right, and they just need to do more of it. Special teams is the last little point we're going to talk about as far as team stats go. Shane Chucci is the one that ended up coming out in the kicking game as kicker 1. So PK 1, Shane Chucci, 1 of 1 on field goals, 8 of 8 on extra points. Perfect day and a great debut. Dontel Montiel is the kickoff specialist, it looks like. So you got that going for you as well. And hey, of course, the best one is, of course, again, no punts. But here's the little stat just for you, Trace. Just for you. Saving the best for last. Kick coverage. Marshall has to cover 4 kicks, and they limit that to 16.3 yards per return. How about that? How about that?
Golf clap.
That's the one. He's been wondering, would that improve for a couple of years? And there you go, 16.3 yard average. So, look, we can talk about some grades. God, I mean, you might be looking at a 4.0 right out of the gate. I don't know how you could take anything away from anything. So let's talk about it. Quarterbacking. Both guys, actually.
Quarterbacking, I'm going A+. A+ without a doubt about it. Grant Wells' stat line, we've talked about it. 16 of 23, 307 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, no fumbles, no any turnovers of any kind. A 69% completion percentage, 89.4 QBR. I mean, what more could you ask for in a debut? Looking at a few other things that Steve Cotton tweeted out the other day, that he's got the most passing yards for a debut quarterback in Marshall history, beating out Stan Hill. He's got tied for the most touchdown passes in a debut from Marshall quarterback. And he's got the second highest pass efficiency rating of a debut quarterback in Marshall history at 239.08. So, I mean, just spectacular stuff. Just absolutely spectacular stuff. Luke Zapan, very good in reserve time. I mean, what more could you want out of the quarterback play? I mean, as criticized and rightfully so as the quarterback position has been over the last few years since Cato's been gone, you can't say anything bad about this quarterback play. And I think for the first time in a long time, you have to be very excited about the quarterback play. And I want to add one more thing, because now Isaiah Green, we all know that he had some really good moments, and we all know that he was inconsistent and all that kind of stuff. But I said this I think I said this yesterday, that even when Isaiah Green was playing at his best, like I don't know what his best game would have been or some of his best games, but even when he was playing at his best, I don't think he was that good. Like as good as Wells. I don't think he was, like, honestly. Like it just looked different. It just was different. So like that's a good sign. I mean, you have to be excited about that. So A+ for the quarterbacks.
Yeah. There's nothing you can give these quarterbacks but an A+ grade. Both guys up and down the field. I mean, 340 some odd yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Both guys plus side yardage on in the run game. I mean, what more can you ask for? This is amazing. I'm not going to compare these two guys to other quarterbacks right yet because it's one game. But man, if this even continues to a percentage of what we saw today, this is going to bode really well for Marshall. One last note I have to say, given the fact that everybody's going to get a year of eligibility back, I mean, Garrett Wells could be like a 7-year starter if he gets all of his eligibility and then has something funky like a medical red shirt or something like that, and then he gets a tack on at the end of the year. So how wild would that be if this kid is a legitimate 5-year starter and is in a Herd uniform for something like 60 games or something crazy like that?
Takes Cato's numbers and beats them all.
He might like have 20,000 yards passing. Anyway, A+ day for the quarterbacks. Great start to the season in a big stage at home on ESPN. They needed to take care of business, and they did. Offensively as a whole, what do you got for the Herd?
I got another A+. I mean, there's literally not anything else you can give it if you want to be actually like honest about if you want to actually have any kind of well, I don't think of the word here, but it's an A+. Like it's a complete A+ game if you've ever seen one. Any validity of your grades at all, it's an A+. I mean, 59 points, 627 total yards. That's the most total yards Marshall has gained since the Charlotte game in 2015 per Steve Cotton. Yeah, so it's going back 5 years. 345 passing, 282 rushing. I mean, great balance. Big numbers both sides, both ways there. Only 2 penalties for 15 yards. You got to like that because sometimes we know how Marshall gets with 7, 8, 9, 10 penalties a game. They only had 7 in this one in the first game of the year. 0 turnovers, which we know how that's been too with Marshall. 11.9 yards per pass, 5.2 yards per rush, 7 of 10 on third downs, 2 of 2 on fourth downs. I mean, just spotless stuff, really. I mean, there's not much more they could have done. I mean, I only picked them to score 34 points in this game, and one of those touchdowns I had them scoring was non-offensive. So they more than blew that away. So offensively, yeah, I mean, it was just absolutely fantastic, and it was unexpectedly fantastic. So A+.
Yeah, they held the ball for a tick over half of the game. That's about the only other positive that you didn't mention. But look, outside of obviously an A+ grade for this offense, here's the only thing I'm going to say about it. Boy, did the Herd fan base need to see this from the Marshall team. That's what it was. That's what it boils down to. They needed to see this happen. They needed to know that some of that Herd swagger from yesteryear is still in the building. So it's nice to know that they can put up almost 60. Shutting out opponent is a defensive side of the animal, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But man, being able to put over 600 bills on the board, I mean, wow, A+ all the way around. Now defense. We've seen a lot of stellar defensive play. You've had several A+ grades for the defense over the past couple of years, so that's not out of the ordinary, and I'm not trying to downplay that, but it's just something that we more commonly see on that side of the ball. But this week, in week 1, fresh off of a weird offseason, what do you got for the Herd defense?
I got another A+. Absolutely another A+. I mean, anytime, I don't really care what the situation is. If you give up 0 points, it's an A+. It's a road in A+. That's what it is. This is an A+ performance. They gave up only 166 total yards, which is the fewest they've given up since 2018 when they shut out UTSA that year. Let's see what else I have written down here. 1 interception. That was great. I mean, we like to see that. I was expecting, one of my keys to victory was I was hoping they would have forced 3+ turnovers. If they would have forced 3+ turnovers, my God, they might have scored 80 in this game.
Yeah, it might have been 75-0.
It might have been. it might have been like completely just ridiculous. And then the defense only allowed 3 out of 12 conversion on third downs. That you gotta like to see that. 0 of 12, 0 of 2 on fourth down. That's good. They're stopping them on fourth down. Just spectacular defensive performance. I mean, yeah, it's against a team that's not on their level, but at the same time, you gotta love to see it. And it says Steve Cotton also put Eastern Kentucky managed only 7 first downs, which is the fewest that Marshall has allowed since 2005 in a game. So, some just stuff that goes back.
Yeah, and wasn't that I saw that tweet? And wasn't that from SMU?
16-13 over SMU.
That was an overtime game.
Game.
They gave up 7 first downs.
Ernie Morris, the hero.
Oh my Lord! All right, look, A+ all the way around. The one area you want to see the Herd improve is as a team. They only had 2 sacks. They did have 3 quarterback hurries, but those numbers have to improve when we get into the meat of the schedule for the Herd. They're not going to be able to survive on 1 or 2 quarterback sacks when you get up against some teams that can put up some points. Other than that, I mean, they really didn't have to have them. So 1 turnover. You like to see maybe another 1, 2 more, and a couple more sacks. But other than that, this is a flawless victory as far as Herd defense goes.
Well, I think a lot of that too is just the fact that Eastern Kentucky, we knew they were going to be a run first team, so you can't really get sacks when you're running the ball a lot either. So.
No, yeah, I agree with you. But at the same token, there was only 16 pass attempts, so you did get 2 sacks on essentially 16 pass attempts. But you still got to get it. You got to get in there. Yeah. I know the opportunity really wasn't there to put them up, but game in and game out, you're gonna want to see those numbers go up. All right, special teams, 16.3 yards per return average for kick coverage. Shane Chucci in his kicking debut taking over for Justin Rowasser, perfect 1-1 on field goals, 8 of 8 on extra points. Kickoffs look good. Lefevre, gets to save his leg for Appalachian State. How about this Herd special teams?
I'm going A+ again. Special teams A+. I mean, just looking at Chucci's debut, he was 1-1 on field goals, 23-yard chip shot. That was good. 8 of 8 on extra points. That was good. I mean, it looks weird seeing a Marshall left-footed kicker. It looks weird because it's been a long time since they've had that. So hopefully he keeps panning out like that. I mean, very small sample size, but very good stuff there. Talik Keaton had a couple punt returns where he was very close to breaking them. Like I remember thinking, if he just gets past 1 or 2 more guys, he could have really went far. So that was good. That's more of his first team all conference punt return type stuff. So good stuff there. They didn't even punt the ball at all. And Steve Cotton put a very interesting tweet on there about that they did not punt in the win over Eastern Kentucky, which is the first time that the Herd punt unit didn't take the field since a 31-24 win at UAB in 2006.
Wow.
Like long time. So great stuff there. Kickoff coverage, like I said, golf clap all freaking day on that. 16 yards a kick return. You gotta love it. After how it was last year, they needed a bounce back, and they had a bounce back in this game. Hopefully that's a sign of things to come in that department, because you don't want to keep seeing that happen, because eventually it's going to cost Marshall if it kept happening. So special teams, honestly, a relatively small sample size. Everything was superb. So A+.
Yeah, A+ all the way around. We had put a huge spotlight on the fact that the entire kicking trio of Rowasser, Beardall, and Jackson White are all gone, and the new trio played a flawless game. The only time Lefevre saw the field was as the holder.
Yeah.
So, hey, he got in. He just didn't have to utilize that punt leg. But look, this is something that look, I'm going to save this point for when you're done talking about coaching, and I'll bring this up because it just popped into my head. So what do you got for these Herd coaches? You've been really critical, and a lot of times deservedly so, of the Marshall coaching staff and their ability to execute or prepare or both for good opponents and bad opponents. What do you got for the coaching staff this week?
I have an A+ yet again for the coaching staff this week. The A+ train all the way down the line here. You have to be impressed with the fact that how weird and unprecedented this offseason has been, and the fact that they didn't even know if they were going to be playing, who they were going to be playing. They only had the Eastern Kentucky game scheduled maybe a month or month and a half ago, something like that. So it's been very little time to prepare for that game. very strange circumstances with the COVID, everything. I mean, you got to be impressed with how they came out and played. I mean, the offensive game plan, I loved it from the start. Cramsey really, really dialed it up pretty well. He let Wells do his thing. Like he started it pretty smart, because his very first pass of the game was like a bubble screen, tunnel screen to Brock Thompson, went for about 15, 20 yards. You like this, and then it just gradually kept building. It went from that to his first throw to in the third quarter or so when he was throwing 40, 50-yard dimes to Woodyard. Like, you got to like to see kind of how that progressed. It kind of almost went in stages, like short passing, intermediate passing, long passing. I mean, the first touchdown of the game was a 22-yarder to Xavier Gaines. That was nice. I mean,
that was a sweet throw.
Sweet throw on a post route. Absolutely sweet throw. But I love the game plan there offensively. I mean, of course, and the defensive game plan was good because they shut them out. Of course, it was good. I mean, the defense played really well. Coaches did a good job there. They dialed up pressure when they needed to. Like you said, didn't always get back there with a lot of sacks, but they were. It was effective. And then the fact that they were able to stop the run like they were as well as they did was good. They didn't let up. That was what was impressive to me. Is usually Marshall has a quarter or so where it's just like, what the heck are they doing? There wasn't any of that in this game. They were absolutely sharp as a tack for 4 quarters, start to finish. They were sharp as a tack, and they didn't let up. Usually sometimes when they get a big lead at halftime, like they'll put 20, 30 points up at halftime, they'll come out in the second half and just kind of milk it, or not milk it, but just kind of coast.
I know what you're going to say. Trying to play the clock game to start the second half.
Trying to play the clock game, yeah, and they did not play the clock game. They put up 38 in the first half. They put up 21 in the second half. So they did it the way it's supposed to be done. They went out and they showed that what they were capable of doing. The coaches didn't hold them back, which has been a big issue as far as I'm concerned over the last few years. So coaching was excellent. So A+.
Yeah, A+, no doubt about it. A couple of notes I'm going to say. You talk about that unbelievable defensive effort. 26 different Marshall defenders got a tackle in that game. 26. Yeah, that's amazing. I think this was a real opportunity for these coaches to get really positive exposure for this Marshall brand, and they wanted to capture that opportunity because, let's face it, when's the last time Marshall played on ESPN and it wasn't a bowl game or a conference championship game?
2010.
There you go. It's been a long, long time.
At least at home.
So now they get the opportunity in front of a football-starved country. All eyes were on that game. If you were at home and wanted to watch football, you were tuned in watching the Herd play. So millions of eyeballs got to watch Marshall put on a show. And you got to, pay a little respect to Doc Holliday for maybe going against what he wanted to do and let him go out there and put on a show. And I don't know that. I don't know. But, just from the last decade of watching Doc coach games, he's not been one to want to go out and put the most flashiest game on TV, with the exception of a few years when Cato and crew were there and they just couldn't, you couldn't not do that. They were that good. So, if given his preference, I'm sure he would have been like, well, look, let me get a, 20-point win. I'll run Brendan Knox. I won't put anything on film and I'll get ready for App State. But it didn't work out that way. I think they did more for their brand, more for themselves, more for nationwide and local recruiting by going out there and doing what they did. So A+ to the coaching staff. Overall, for the Herd, the game day experience, everything, all encompassing. What do you got overall for the Herd in week 1?
A+ overall. I mean, this is the only time that I can tell you for sure, the only time I've ever had all A+ grades on one of these wrap-ups. And that's saying something because, I mean, that's a lot of games that we've been doing over the last few years. So it's the only time it's been all A+. So that just shows how good everything was. I mean, just to sum it up, it was just the perfect first game. I mean, if you think about it, like, what's the worst thing that happened to Marshall in this game? I don't know. What's the worst thing that happened? Like a negative 6-yard run,
quarterback sack,
a quarterback sack. Like they give up like one pass that was like 20 yards or 25 yards. Like that's the worst thing that happened. Like usually the things that happen bad just stick out like a sore thumb, but no, they don't.
Busted coverage for a 90-yard touchdown. That's the kind of stuff that
Yes.
Like, oh man, how did that happen?
Busted coverage or or kickoff coverage, giving up a 50, 60-yard return on the opening kickoff or something like that. A bunch of turnovers. None of that in this game. So, I mean, it was an A-plus game if you'll ever have one. Really good. The crowd, even though it was a socially distanced quarantine COVID type crowd, they only allowed at maximum 12,500. Crowd was good. They did a pretty good job of spacing everybody out. Everybody was pretty good with the masks. I mean, for the most part, they were pretty good with the masks. It sounded good on TV. I watched it back. It sounded pretty loud for a 30% capacity type crowd. So it was solid all around the board. And Lord, that's what I said. Everybody needed that. Everybody needed Marshall football and live in-person football. If you're a Herd fan, you needed that after this year. And you had a big question mark of whether or not you were going to get it at all. And the fact that you have it and you can go to the games, it's just like a weight lifted off your shoulders, honestly. So A+ overall, everything about it, A+.
They not only needed it, but they needed to be able to watch it on a major network in a top tier production, capability instead of just on Facebook. I mean, this was something that the Herd fan base needed. They needed it. There were so many people that have been disenfranchised or turned off over the past couple of years, and so many more that are sitting on the fence thinking, all right, man, I'm really getting tired of this. It's boring. It's whatever, whatever your excuse is, everybody had one. And I would love to hear if you have an excuse after watching this game, because we've said it over and over. And here's the point I meant to say while we were talking coaches. Yeah, we're going to keep saying this is Eastern Kentucky, and they're a pretty bad team. They're not on Marshall's level. Look, Marshall has played other teams recently that is not on their level. Rhode Island. How about Morgan State? Some Garner-Webb. Some of these really lower tier schools that were not good, and they still put up points. Or Marshall did not score effectively. They could not move the ball. Things went wrong. Clock management, whatever it was. And there was none of that against this bad, lower level team.
Yeah.
And Marshall's played those before and had those things happen. So look, benefit of the doubt, let's just say that they turned a corner and are ready to make a charge in 2020. Let's say that. I'm not pumping the brakes. I'm pumping the brakes. I'm not saying undefeated. I'm not saying they're going to put up 50 a game. I'm just saying, hey, for now, let's say they turned a corner. And even if they lose to Appalachian State, but they put on a strong showing, they lose 24-21 or something like that, or even if it's by 10 or 14, but it's bad breaks that take the game away from them, you still have to think, wow, we could really make some noise in Conference USA. What a great game to wrap up. I know this is the longest wrap up we've ever probably done, but I mean, it was so many stats, so much spreading around, the West Virginia tie, ESPN, the pandemic, all this stuff merited this talking about, and we're not even done yet. So here's the big question. What do you know about the Herd after one game?
Boy, that's a loaded question, isn't it?
It's going to be every week, but what do you know? What do you think you know about Marshall after one game?
Well, if I think I would know anything, I would think that the offense is in better shape this year. Defense, the jury's kind of, let me preface this. This is not to criticize the defense. They were exceptional, but the jury's still out on the defense just because it takes more because, like you said, we've seen the defense shut out, or not shut out necessarily, but we've seen the defense play really well a lot over the last few years. So it's not that unexpected to see that. But what's unexpected is to see the offense look as good as they did. Even against a team that's not on their level, it's still unexpected. I mean, they have not been this smooth offensively in a long time. So it lends itself to some questions whether or not they can keep it up or not. Appalachian State's going to be a big measuring stick game for the entire team to see if they can hang with one of the, like I said, easily best group of 5 teams in the country, I would say, if not higher than that. I mean, it's going to be big. So it's going to be really big. And now I will say also that Marshall did beat Morgan State 62-0 in 2016, and they went 3-9 that year. And that's been brought up. I tweeted that, and it's true. You can't just go off of this game and say Marshall's going to be in a New Year's Six bowl or they're going to run through Conference USA. You can't say that. But if they do that, well, they already did that. If they did that against Eastern Kentucky and then they turn around and beat Appalachian State in a couple weeks, I'm not pumping any brakes after that. Like, I'm going to be like, all right, this team should win Conference USA. Like, if they can beat Appalachian State, this team should win the conference. There's no excuses anymore. This has to be it. So, but I mean, if I think what I think I know is I think the offense is better this year. I mean, I would say it would have to be just based on one game. I mean, they're not going to keep that going, 59 points every week and that flawless. But like, I would expect this could be a year where they put up at least 30 to 35 a game. Hopefully, they might have a quarterback. They might have a very dynamic, potentially great quarterback waiting there to break out even more over the course of the rest of the season. So got to be pretty excited about it, I think.
Well, in keeping with Marshall's theme, if Appalachian State comes to town, it kind of seems like it would be Luke Zaban that would beat them, because it's always that second string quarterback that makes those big wins. I mean, it was, the backup against Kansas State. It was the backup against Purdue, I think. And
well, he was a starter, but he ended up being a backup.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just one of those weird, wild things. But anyway, of course I'm joking. But yeah, I mean, if Marshall beats Appalachian State here in a couple weeks and they beat them, by a decent margin, 10-point win or something like that, you can take the brakes off. You can pump this team up as much as you want to. The fan base has every right to do that, because you will have then knocked off. You say top 5 G5 pro. I think they're one of the top 2 or 3 annually, not just here as of late. Like Memphis has come on strong in the past few years, and yada, yada. And UCF has come on strong in the past few years. But it's been Boise State forever, and Appalachian State's been good as soon as they moved up to the Sun Belt and stayed good. I mean, so yeah, I think they're one of the top 2, 3 teams annually. And where they fall in the actual pecking order from year to year is different, but consistency-wise, there's no arguing that Appy's one of the better teams. A couple of, I guess, housekeeping notes of note for the Herd as we end this episode. Got a bye week coming in. Marshall gets to rest up, game plan, do whatever they got to do for Appalachian State. And then it looks like they could potentially have another bye week, because news broke yesterday that Rice may end up canceling some games through early October, which of course means the Marshall game on October the 3rd, which could leave Marshall scrambling maybe to find another opponent or just accept another bye week. Yeah, we already looked at it. It's not an ideal space to stick in East Carolina. And there's no shuffling around. Like maybe we could see Marshall try to bump Middle Tennessee to that week, because Middle Tennessee plays Western Kentucky that week. I think that's their homecoming. Middle Tennessee's homecoming, that is. So that's not going to happen. So if Rice ends up canceling the Marshall game, Marshall just might lose one on the schedule. That's just the way it is. So, all right. Also late breaking kind of news. In what we thought would be a pass for most coaches in 2020 because of what's going on, seeing rumblings that Jay Hobson might get canned down there in Southern Miss after one game. So much for that. We'll see if that happens, because, boy, that'd be harsh, wouldn't it? That would be harsh. But anyway, final thoughts, Trace, and then we will get out of here on this epic Marshall Eastern Kentucky game wrap-up.
Praise Jesus, football is back. Football is back. Marshall football is back. What a time to be alive. I mean, it was awesome being at that game. I mean, it just really was. It was almost kind of like you're used to going to the games as much as most people are. You're used to it, but like it was almost surreal to be there in that situation with everything that's been going on in the world. The fact that that football had been threatened so much by COVID, and the fact that Marshall was allowing honestly a decent amount of fans. Like it wasn't the bare minimum. It was a decent amount of fans. It was a pretty good crowd given everything. The fact that they allowed that, the fact that it was a beautiful, perfect, 80-degree and sunny day on ESPN it was just awesome. Like you said, the Herd fan base needed that game. College football fans needed that game in a lot of regards, just to have any kind of football back, FBS football on ESPN on a Saturday. So awesome stuff. You got to be excited about what Marshall could be this year. I mean, after one game, you can't. It's hard to get too excited just because you know how Marshall is. Every time you think that they've turned the corner over the last few years, they do something to take them right back down to just below the corner. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. Hopefully they found the recipe for success offensively. Hopefully they finally found their quarterback to replace Cato and be the next Cato caliber. Hopefully. I'm knocking on every piece of wood I have here. We'll see, though. I think you got to be pretty optimistic, but you also have to be a little reserved about it at the same time. But yeah, Saturday, the whole day about Saturday of the game and everything surrounding it was much needed, much appreciated by the fan base. So
yeah, everybody in the country needed to watch that game, and I'll say it again: Marshall fans needed that was live, real-time therapy for the Herd. They put up with a lot over the years, and whatever, however you want to say it, whatever it was, they needed that. They needed to see that their team was capable of going out and dominating somebody. So if they can continue to do that, great. I would remind you that there are tons of fans that are either a 10 on the enjoyment scale or a 0 on the, he's a bum, he's a scrub scale. So mediate your expectations. You're still dealing with a relatively young quarterback. He's but one game. He's going to have struggles. It's going to happen. And you need to be able to look past that and deal with it, because far too often fans seem to romanticize the past and they forget the fact that, Chad Pennington, all-time great, lost games as a true freshman. Even though Marshall played for a national title in 1AA in 95 when he was a true freshman, they still lost games. They didn't go undefeated. He
stunk up that first start too.
And then 1997, when Marshall moved up to FBS ball and went to Morgantown and played West Virginia University, it was Chad Pennington that threw late interceptions that basically took that game away from Marshall. So it wasn't always sunshine and rainbows for the Herd greats. So if Grant Wells happens to have a 3-interception game and you lose a game to Florida Atlantic or Florida International or something like that, well, it just comes along with it.
Freshman.
Yeah, well, I mean, hell, Pennington at that time wasn't a freshman. He was a freshman, had redshirted, and so he was a redshirt sophomore. Yep. And went into Morgantown, had plenty of games, and on Marshall's biggest stage to that point, with Randy Moss on the field, they couldn't get it done because Chad had struggled late in the game. So, just remember that. How about when Byron Leftwich was a first-year starter and would not throw the ball away and just took sack after sack after sack?
Lost 42-0 to Toledo in 2000.
Right. See, remember that stuff, Herd fans. It's not always about, they threw the ball up and down the field and he had 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. Yeah, they also struggled at times too. And what about Rakeem Cato? He struggled when he was a freshman, splitting time. Yeah, he got benched. And all that, that a lot of times that galvanizes those guys and it makes them a better player. And you see, we saw some struggles with quarterbacks and some rise above it and some get in a funk and, it is what it is. But you can't, I know ESPN was jokingly, ready to put the Heisman on Grant Wells after one game. And let's be honest, he could throw for 10,000 yards this season and they still wouldn't even invite him to New York. No. I mean, that's just how ESPN is. But, or how the Power 5 bias is. Let me put it that way. So take it for what it's worth. Enjoy it when it's good and be patient when it's bad, because Marshall could play for a title this year. They could let it slip away this year. But right now, you got to like where you're at versus where you were a year ago. Looks pretty good. So, Trace, let's get the heck out of here, and we'll look forward to a bye week, and then we'll be talking about Appalachian State. So take us out.
Go Herds.
Go Tops. We will see you next week. Actually, I'll see you in just a couple of days when Steven and I are previewing the Western Kentucky at Louisville game. It's the Moonshine Throwdown podcast. Later.